What you have tonight, of course, we are checking on a key element in the running of this country. Over to you, Linda.
The security element, the security situation in the country, very, very important. It's long since we were on set together.
Absolutely.
But I'm glad that we're back.
Yeah.
And we're back with the bang, as always. It's about the people. And remember, the conversation is about you. It is important that you interact with us. We'll be telling you how to do that later on. But as George says, it's the security component that we're discussing tonight. Just why is it that we do not seem to get it right when it comes to the question of security? These are the key questions that we'll be asking. Policy, this question of banditry, the question of, organized crimes, the question of terrorism. Just where are we at as a country? And what are some of the solutions that we're supposed to present so that moving forward, we can say the cases of insecurity are a game of the past. And like George says, my name is Linda Alela.
Absolutely. Good to have you in studio once again.
Thank you.
And of course, you can expect a reverberating conversation as you take us on the road next time. Of course, I did inform you, Victor Muyakane is also here. Victor, good evening. Good to see you.
Good evening.
Whom do you have for us tonight?
Oh, goodness. We have quite a lot in store for you, good people. And I think I would like to lead with a quote from the great Nelson Mandela.
Absolutely.
And this is what it says. Safety and security don't just happen. They are a result of collective consensus, public investment. And we owe our children, who are the most vulnerable citizens in our society, a life free of violence and fear. But that's not the country we're living in today, is it, George?
No, it is not.
It is not.
Things have changed.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And that will, of course, need to be fixed. Yeah, and of course now a lot will be happening. We shall be speaking to Brian Adera, a security expert, John Kinothia, a security advisor and leadership consultant, as well as Stella Oyagi, looking at the humanitarian aspect. She's a human rights lawyer, as well as Judge Musamali, a security expert. This and much more coming your way right here on the Daily Report. The People's Court will be coming to you in a short while as well. But first, the highlights. Tonight, panic and fear at an all-time high in Kapwenda-Sum area of Baringo County after suspected armed bandits surrounded a primary school and a GSU camp, resulting into a 2-hour gunfight.
Wakapigana tangu saa 3:30 mpaka saa 10. Saa hii sisi hatujatoka nje, hata tulilala mchana wote mpaka hata watoto wanakosa kukula.
Legal minds now argue that proposal by the Chief Justice Martha Koome to reduce life imprisonment to 30 years in jail will help in ensuring justice is not abused and misused.
Their cases are reviewed from time to time, and then these names are forwarded to the committee. Normally it used to be the president who could just declare, maybe on a Mashujaa Day, declare that those people have served for over 50 years, or they who have served the longest for over 30 years, I set them free.
Plus, the Ministry of Education now says it is not feasible to ensure all children get the same school uniform, as parents now allowed to buy uniform from any suppliers.
Parents and the tutors around that particular area will be able to now, making this Yambai school, for example, make uniforms which now anybody coming from any part of the country.
You can grab yourself a cup of coffee, tea, or water as you wait for that important conversation on the state of security in the country. This coming hot on the heels of our top story tonight. We invite your feedback at Muyakane, at Linda_Alela, at George Maringa_ at TV47 News. Use the hashtag PeoplesCourt, hashtag Daily Report. Once again, we thank you for joining us. Tonight, tension is high at Kapwenda-Sum area in Arabal, Baringo County after bandits attacked a GSU camp as the officers were on patrol in the area, holding fort for about 2 hours. According to the chief of this area, William Koech, heavy gunfire was witnessed as the officers fought off the bandits. Sheila Chelangat opens our broadcast tonight with that report.
Heavy gunfire ensued Tuesday morning in Kapwenda-Sum, Arabal, Baringo County. and for close to 5 hours, this sent panic amongst residents of the area. Tension in the area continues to escalate following this attack on a GSU camp whose officers were in a routine patrol.
Wakora wakafunga kwa GSU, wakafunga pale kwa mto, wakafunga kwa GSU kuingia kupitia kwa hospitali, wakawa wanapiga GSU kutoka nyuma, wakapiga pia ile njia kutoka Chemorongion. Kiasi kwamba vita iliendelea mpaka karibu saa 7.
And a few moments later, reports from the area chief indicated that the bandits had surrounded Kapindasum Primary School, forcing the students to lay down flat in their classroom.
Chini tu tunalala, hatujatoka nje. Saa tatu hatujakula lunch, hatujatoka nje, hatujatoka hata kwenda aje. Mpaka saa hii tunalala kwa nyumba ndani na bado tunasikia marisasi inalia.
Frequent attacks in the area had led to the closure of this school in 2019, and it was only this year that the school was reopened.
Tuko na wasiwasi sana hata kufika sasa. Sababu tunaona hawa wataenda kwa msituni hapo karibu. Na saa yote tunasikia risasi kwa karibu pensa shule.
Locals here are a worried lot as the wave of insecurity continues to persist.
Mesanga kwa sababu Kindiki amesema hii watu aende kabisa, aende kwao, kila mtu aende kwao. Amesinda sisi sasa, amekuja kwetu na ataka kuua sisi bure, na sisi bado peleka hata vitu yao ni bure tu.
The past month, 4 people have died in bandit attacks. This despite promises from the government of its efforts to address the security situation in the area.
Kindiki aondoe kabisa hii watu. Aondoe kabisa waende kwao. Sisi hatutachukua kitu ya mtu. Na sisi hatutaenda kusumbua hawa.
The exact number of casualties in the morning incident remains unknown, even as there is heavy deployment of security personnel in the area. Sheila Chalangat for TV47.
Thank you, Sheila, for that. And of course, we shall be beginning by asking our guests tonight, our experts in the security sector, what more needs to be done. Stand by for that conversation in a short while. Now, settlers on former Starehe Member of Parliament, the late Gershon Kirima's land in Njiru, right here in Nairobi, say they are open to dialogue and are willing to pay up on the amount required to have them legally acquire the land they are currently living on, stating they are opposed to face the bulldozer as they have until December 31st to leave, this as ordered by the court. A section of the settlers drawn from the East Riverside Estate have called on the Kirima family to open channels for dialogue, as Moiga William now reports.
The story buildings, homes, social amenities could be reduced to rubble by the 31st of December if the plight of the settlers falls on deaf ears, following the decision by Kisumu Environment and Lands Court Judge Samson Okongo, who granted ownership of the 1,000-acre of land in Njiru to Gershon Kirima's widow, Teresio Erimo and Anne Kirima, after battling the squatter since 2003. Following the court order which could spell doom to the settlers, the affected persons living on a section of the expansive land, the East Riverside Estate, which is 88 acres hosting close to 100 families, are opposed to moving out of the land.
Kwa hivyo tungependa familia ya Kirima pia watuonee huruma, tuweze kukaa pamoja, tuzungumze, ili hata kama ni kulipa polepole, tuweze kulipa polepole ile gharama ya shamba. Manake tukivunjua saizi, hatujui tutaenda wapi. Hizi family ni nyingi sana, na watu hapa ndio wametegemea.
Violeta Luda, also a resident of the East Riverside Estate, dating back to the year 2012, argues that the areas have undergone immense infrastructural development, including social amenities, arguing it will be unreasonable if all this goes down to drain, whereas the option of solving the Njiru land quagmire in within a win-win situation.
Tuna stima, tuna barabara tumewekewa ya lami na serikali, tumeletewa maji, pipes zimepita, tumewekewa sewer line na serikali, na nasema ya kwamba wakati rais wetu Ruto alikuja uongozini alituambia Kama kuna mahali watu wamekaa na wamejenga, hakutabomolewa.
For this father of 7 children, the only place known as home for his family is in this estate, adding that it will be a big blow for his family to be evicted, alleging he is a victim of fraud after the piece of land he is living on was sold to him by individuals who assured him it was a genuine deal he was being offered, stating that he is willing to pay up any other amount that is required.
Familia ya Kirima pia kama binadamu, kwa sababu sisi wote ni wa Mungu, tunaomba watusikilize, tusikilizane, kwa sababu hakuna jambo itaharibika. Mimi mwenyewe niko na makosa, nimekuja kukaa, nimekubali.
In a Monday ruling delivered by Justice Okongo, those occupying the over 970 acres of land have up to December 31st to vacate or be evicted by the proprietor. The judgment followed a protracted court battle between the Kirimas and residents, who some acquired the property through self-help groups. William, TV47.
And we wait to see how that turns out. Now, East African Portland Cement Company, EAPCC, has started the process of regularization of more than 900 acres piece of land occupied by squatters days after issuing a 14-day ultimatum. In the run-up to the regularization of the said land, the company had on last year convened a public participation to discuss the process through which the squatters would buy the land. Mike Kagwongo with more details.
3 land pieces numbered 8784/144/145 and 653 in Mavoko are once again on demand by their own occupants after a notice was issued by East African Portland Cement Factory. At the site, this office is full of squatters who came to collect their forms, as encapsulated in the cement factory demands. According to the company, land occupants are expected to walk to the respective scheme chairman office, where they will be issued with verification letter and allotment certificate. The applicant shall also write an application letter to Portland company requesting regularization of their parcel of land. Applicants shall then take their application letters together with verification letter and allotment certificate to Portland Cement Company office at Adi River. Here, they shall receive response from EAPCC through the appointed land agent and offer letter. According to the company, the applicant shall be required to pay a reversible 100,000 shillings deposit and administrative fees as advised by the agent. They shall then take proof of payment to the appointed land agent located at the EAPCC to open an account and file. The account will then aid the applicant to get the sale agreement from Portland and beacon verification certificate. With these certificates, the applicants shall now begin the process of paying for the land. Upon payment completion, they shall receive title deed under their respective names. Before the title deeds are granted, an applicant must pay an amount of 600,000 shillings in installments.
The decision followed an agreement with the occupants of this specific land to pay for the parcels they occupy and withdraw the cases they had taken to court.
The size of the occupied plot will have an impact on how much registered members must pay. Portland's management has since accepted the existence of Syokimau Mavoko Community Association, the Ngwataneo Yamo Kamba Self-Help Group, and the Kadama Welfare Association groups, whom have been there since 2010, and squatters under these groups shall not be evicted. Mike Kagwongo, TV47, Nairobi.
Thank you, Mike, for that. Tonight, Kenya Kwanza and Azimio teams in the National Dialogue Committee have failed to agree on the contentious issue of the cost of living and are now scheduled to meet experts next week on how to navigate the sensitive matter and reach a consensus. This is after the committee adopted the inclusion of the agenda after Azimio leader Raila Odinga threatened Azimio will quit the talks on Sunday. Apollo Kamau reports.
Monday's inclusion of the cost of living agenda in Naivasha in the wake of Azimio's threat to boycott the talks hit a snag on the second day of the talks after Kenya Kwanza and Azimio dialogue teams failed to reach consensus on the sensitive issue.
We have not concluded our discussions on the matter of the cost of living. It is one of the very heavy matters before us and a matter that has been of great concern to the people of Kenya in relation to the high and escalating cost of living. And therefore, we want to give it all the attention due to it. And we felt that there was need to engage with other interested parties that would help us to in our negotiations.
As a committee being accused of only dealing with matters affecting the elite and not being mindful of the welfare of the citizenry.
While Azimio is advocating for a drastic reduction in the prices of fuel and other basic commodities that skyrocketed after the removal of subsidies, Kenya Kwanza is pushing for a gradual ease on the cost of living burden, terming it as an ongoing process as the government has already initiated measures.
Today, Kimani and I have signed letters of invitation to the people we consider important who are going to help us crack this matter of the high cost of living during the round-table discussions on Tuesday and Wednesday next week.
Despite agreeing on the fidelity to political parties, though yet to say how interference of political parties will be cured by law, the National Dialogue Committee, especially the Azimio side, will be watching keenly how National Assembly Speaker Moses Wetangula rules on Azimio's quest to remove nominated MP Sabina Chege as the coalition deputy minority whip in the National Assembly. Apul Kamau, TV47.
Thank you, Apollo, for that. Education CS Ezekiel Machogu now says that parents should be given the right to buy school uniforms from the shops of their choice. This considering the financial capabilities of the parents, and this comes amidst a proposal that was presented to Parliament that sought to have one uniform for all students across the country.
The Ministry of Education has now come out to say that it will be impossible to have one school uniform for all students across the country. While speaking at the Parliamentary Committee on Education today, Education CS Ezekiel Machogu says the idea of same school uniform might not be favorable due to, among other things, varying weather conditions across the country. On the heated debate about where parents are supposed to buy school uniforms, Machogu, through a circular to school heads, urged them not to force parents to get uniforms from specific sellers.
Yes, I can see you have already written a circular to principals not to compel students to buy uniforms at the designated maybe uniform selling centers. But you are aware that these circulars are not implemented. You have good intentions, but your officers at the ground, they don't enforce the regulations.
Githunguri Member of Parliament Gathoni Wamuchomba says the prices of uniforms are quite unbearable for most parents.
In this country, there are so many children who have dropped out of school, not because they're not willing to learn, but because they cannot afford the type of uniforms that are prescribed by specific schools. There are schools that are going to the levels of asking for uniform worth 25,000, 30,000, and this is unbearable to most of the parents, noting that the economy is very harsh.
Machogu says the parents will be mandated to procure uniforms during admission as stipulated in admission letters.
Uniform, what we have issued this year, in the admission letter of each and every school, may it be a national school, may it be an extra account school, or any other such school. If you will be looking at the admission letter, you will be able to see an item which says the school requires this kind of uniform, and it is the responsibility of the parent to procure one.
The members of Parliament had earlier suggested that all schools across the country have the same uniform, which should have been procured from specific sellers. Vera Alberta, TV47, Nairobi.
Thank you, Vera, for that. A family in Kyulu area is demanding for justice after one set of a twin was allegedly stolen during birth at Kyulu Hospital. According to the family, both the mother and the twins were in good health prior to the birth, and however, the hospital claims one of the twins died 2 weeks before birth.
Drama broke out at Kyulu Hospital as friends and family of Njiru demanded for one of her twins, who they allegedly claim was stolen during birth. According to Njiru, the twins' mother, she arrived at the hospital Monday last week with the hope of delivering her twins. However, the hospital scheduled her delivery for the next day as it was a cesarean section.
Kupata mtoto. Nilikuwa nimepepa ma twins. Sasa venye nilikuwa na pepa twins, huyo daktari akaniuliza na venye uko na hii tumbo kidogo hivyo inaweza pepa watoto wawili. Nikamwambia nilienda scanning mara 3, akaniambia nimepepa ma twins.
After successfully giving birth, Njiru says the hospital only showed her one of the twins, with all efforts to see the other twin being unsuccessful.
Unaona nikiitisha tu mtoto wangu, madaktari wananiambia nitoke kwa OC. Nikamwambia nataka mtoto wangu. Ilifika jana, ilikuwa around saa 2 to saa 3:30. Maskari wawili wakanikujia hadi kwa bed, venye nilikuwa nina change huyu mtoto diaper. Alafu venye nilikuwa na mchange, au maskari wakaniambia wewe ndio hebu nitoka nje.
According to the hospital, one of the twins died in the womb 2 weeks prior to the birth, a matter that is highly disputed by the twins' family.
Bwana kuingilia kesi, tunaambiwa mtoto alikaa pass 2 weeks ago akiwa kwa tumbo. Tukauliza how happens mtu anaweza ishi kwa tumbo, mtoto anaweza kaa amekufa kwa tumbo na mama ana survive na huyu mwingine ako sawa. Ikasindikana, tukaanza kufungiwa milango.
And despite the investigation being in the hands of the Director of Criminal Investigation DCI, the family flanked by human rights group Haki Africa is unhappy about how it is being conducted.
Nataka tu usaidizi nini nipate mtoto wangu. Mimi ndio naweza sema nipate mtoto wangu, lakini pigania right yangu.
Zainab Mohammed, TV47.
Such a sad story right there. The decision by the Chief Justice, Mavoko, to amend 2 bills that will lead to the scrapping off of the life sentence has once again opened the debate on capital punishment against the reform structure. While some lawyers fault Kome for what they say is equal to giving capital offenders a slap on the wrist, a section of lawyers are of the opinion that the move, which would apply to all convicts sentenced to death as of November 21st, 2022, is a way to boost Kenya's human rights profile.
Prisoners who are charged with capital offences will have their charges limited to a sentence not exceeding 30 years if the 2 bills fronted by Chief Justice Martha Koome to Parliament will be approved. The proposal, which has divided legal minds in the country, was aimed at reforming the punishment to look humane and subscribing to international tenets of protection of right to life. Lawyer Gibson Gisore says this is a way of giving someone another chance of asking for forgiveness and probably placing Kenya into the map of countries that avoid death penalty when someone is charged with any serious offense.
There are people who are actually not represented and they've been accused of heinous crimes. So by chance or by mistake, you find that these people have actually gone inside. They could actually be not guilty. So if we go by that assumption, and we find that there are a couple in every 10 people, you find that there will be 2 or 3 who are or either due to the ignorance of the law or being indigent people, they might have ended up to be taken inside or to be prosecuted and been found guilty.
The debate has been in the corridors of justice since the controversial case of Muruatetu. Back then in 1999, Lawyer Gibson Gisore argues that there is also a need of interrogating why someone wants to commit suicide, which the judiciary seeks to decriminalize attempted suicide that has been treated as a criminal offense for over the years now.
You know, their cases are reviewed from time to time, and then these names are forwarded to the committee. Normally it used to be the president who could just declare, maybe on a mashujadi, declare that those people have served for over 50 years or they who have served the longest for over 30 years, I set them free.
July 21st, 2023, President William Ruto reduced the death sentence for all capital offenders to a life sentence. In a Gazette notice published by Attorney General Justin Muturi, Ruto issued the directive following recommendations by the Advisory Committee on the Power of Mercy.
Once we interrogate the reasons why, we'll actually find that this person is psychologically affected.
Muturi also indicated that the directive would apply to all convicts sentenced to death as of November 21st, 2022. Under the current Kenyan law, which was drafted in the year 1930s, individuals found guilty of murder, robbery with violence, or treason can face the death penalty. The Chief Justice Martha Koome wants Parliament to approve a change to Section 112A of the Penal Code in subsection 4 that replaces the word manslaughter with the word second-degree murder. Paul Kirobi, TV47, Nairobi.
Thank you, Paul, for that. Grief has engulfed Musunji village in Hamisi sub-county, Vihiga county, after a 17-year-old boy was stabbed to death by his male friend over what has been identified as a love tussle. It is alleged that the Form 3 boy at Kaptek Secondary School met his death after arguing with his rival over a girlfriend. Angry villagers stormed the suspect's home, razing down 9 houses as well as destroying property.
Musunji village in Hamisi sub-county. Residents here are left in shock and pain following the death of 17-year-old Clinton Mukasia, who is said to have engaged in a love tussle with a male rival. Allegedly, the two were eyeing one girl who is said to be at the center of the tussle.
Nilipata mtoto wangu ameanguka, nikaita mtoto hakuitika. Nikaangalia mtoto hakuitika.
Nilikuta kijana kweli mwili yake imesha kata roho. Nguo zile ambazo alikuwa nazo nilijaribu kuzitoa, nikakuta ya kwamba huyo kijana tayari amemtunga hapa na hiyo kisu imeenda kabisa ndani. Na tena amehumwa hapa, hii mzizi karibu ikatike.
The girl's father confirms being aware of the love triangle, but states that his efforts to separate her daughter from the two could not bear fruit.
Siku ya jana nilimuuliza, wewe maneno yenye mimi nimesikia uko na uhusiano na huyo msichana ni ya ukweli, na wewe ni mtoto yangu na wewe ni mtoto yangu? Akaniambia, mzee, mimi sijui hiyo. Na akapanda juu wakiwa na ule kijana mwenye alitunga mwingine kisu. Nikamwambia, kijana, unajua ukiendelea hivi maisha yako haitakuwa mzuri. Ndio akaenda, mimi nikawachana nao, mimi nikarudi. Sasa baadaye ndio nasikia huyo mwenye walikuwa na yeye ametunga mwingine kisu.
Following the murder, angry residents took to the suspect's home, razing down houses as well as destroying property in the home. A section of the villagers here strongly condemning the incident.
Sasa kitu yenye nitaambia tu watu wetu watriki. Vitu zingine tunafaa tuangalie. Mtu mwenye amefanya makosa ili tutile na yeye kuliko kuharibu vitu za after mtu mwenyewe jamii ya poma. Sasa hiyo ndio makosa kubwa yenye wamefanya sana. Hiyo ni kitendo mbaya.
The murder suspect is already in custody as well as 2 other suspects linked to the destruction of property. Hamisi Sub-County OCPD Ruth Langat says that investigations are underway.
Washukiwa wawili wameshikwa, wenye tunahofia uchunguzi inaendelea, na uchunguzi inapokamilika watafikishwa mahakamani. Leo officers kufuatia uchunguzi yao wameweza kurudi pale mahali hiyo tukio ilitokea, wakiwa wamesaidiana na wananchi na area chiefs na assistant chiefs. Wameweza kupata ng'ombe. Tumeweza kurecover ng'ombe 6 na ndama 4 na mbuzi 1 ya kike.
Arnold Adidi, TV47, Vihiga.
Thanks, Arnold. The family of a high school student in Njiru, Tharaka County, is crying for justice after their loved one died under mysterious circumstances. According to the mother of the first form student, the management of the school did not inform her about the death of her son, who allegedly died on Friday last week.
Mystery that surrounds the death of a Form 1 student at Njiru High School in Tharaka County has left his family with many unanswered questions. The question that lingers is what killed 15-year-old Sebastian Jeroge in school.
Na niuma, mtoto wangu hajai gonjeka.
hajawahi gonjeka. Nilipeana mtoto mzima, mimi nimerudishiwa maiti.
The deceased mother, Priscilla Njiru, says she's still in shock after receiving news of her son's passing.
Aliniambia ati mtoto aligongwa na mpira wakicheza kwa uwanja. Then mimi vile nilikuja hapa Friday, I had another story from the principal. Principal aliniambia ati mtoto aligongewa parade na mtoto mwenzake, of which it is not making sense. Tena wananiambia ati mtoto alikuwa na pneumonia, amefanywa x-ray. Surely
Njiru is now demanding investigations into the death of her son, saying the school management did not inform the family about their son, who is said to have died on Friday last week.
They stayed with my son for 5 good days. Sababu mtoto aligojeka on Saturday. Principal alikuwa anataka tuchukue mwili tuende naye. Hata hiyo Saturday. Juu aliniambia tuende ati tutasaidiana na yeye kutoa mwili hapa tupeleke huko nyumbani. Kuna kitu anataka kuficha.
The Chuka OCPD Paul Kuria has confirmed the incident, saying investigations have been launched into the matter.
Ripoti tulipata kwa mwalimu ni kwamba huyu mwanafunzi alikuwa amepelekwa hospitali tarehe 16 Ebu, hospitali inaitwa Tenri, akiwa ana mguu ambaye ulikuwa umefiba ama umefura, na pia akapimwa ati akaonekana alikuwa na pneumonia. Hatujui baada ya hapo, kwa sababu alitibiwa na akarudi shule, ndio sasa hii siku ambaye aliaga akawa amepatikana akiwa amezidiwa. So wakati sisi tunapata ripoti tayari alikuwa ameaga.
The school's principal Geoffrey Mwamba refused to talk to the media about the incident.
Afanywe postmortem kwa shule, watuambie kama wamemleta kwa hospitali vile walisema, ama alikufia kwa shule wakamleta kwa mochari.
Wangu hayuko, ameenda na sitawahi muona, but I know kama hii kitu haitarekebishwa saa hii, sababu I think there is negligence kwa hiyo shule.
The family has vowed not to bury their kin until justice is done.
Something is not right. Mimi nataka justice ya mtoto wangu. Hiyo tu ndio nataka. Siwezi chukua mwili ya mtoto wangu hapa nipeleke nyumbani, kwa sababu principal hiyo Saturday alishinda akiuliza my mom, unakujia mwili saa ngapi? Mumefika wapi? Why does he has that much concern ya mwili itolewe hapa iende?
The body of the deceased has been taken to Chuka Referral Hospital mortuary awaiting postmortem. Reporting for TV47, I'm Violet Auma.
Thank you, Violet Auma, for that report, which leads us into our first short break right here on the Daily Report. When we come back, we still have more news on the other side, business and sports. And also at this point, I wish to inform you that our guests are already in studio for that important conversation on the People's Court. On the business front, we shall be telling you why 10% of the ugali you will be consuming very soon will be induced by, or rather will be induced by cassava flour that is in a bid for the government to fill the food basket. You want to stand by for that and much more. Hibak Said will be telling you why. Welcome back. You're watching the Daily Report. Let's make sense of the sense. The excess demand for the dollar and a tight dollar reserve is to blame for the nosedive of the shilling. This is according to CBK Governor Dr. Kyulu, who says pushing up tourism will ensure the inflow of much-needed foreign exchange, which will over time boost the national currency and cement its stability.
Tonight, shock and outcry, especially from manufacturers, as the shilling finally crossed the 150 mark and the official rate finally caught up with the retail rates.
Some local manufacturers are picking up manufacturing here instead of importation.
While appearing before the Parliamentary Finance Committee, the head of the Apex Bank, Dr. Kyulu, said sustained depreciation was as a result of several macroeconomic factors out of the control of the CBK.
The decline in others could be because of the exchange rate, and of course we would still want to support the intermediate imports, but the tariff structure is such that it favors the intermediate items and also the raw products.
He sustained that the exchange rate will be stabilized with increased tourism activities in the country and incentives meant to pique investor interest.
The governor cannot dictate what the exchange is going to be. But those interventions, hopefully, that we are oversighting on will lead to something. But
this as the CBK moves in on securing additional financing from the World Bank. And that one. A weak shilling means importers will be spending more in bringing in goods as raw materials for factories, thereby raising the cost of inputs for firms, which in turn pass the additional expenses to consumers. Hibak Said for TV47.
Thank you, Hibak, for that. And to the story I promised you before the break, soon 10% of the ugali you consume might be cassava infused, as the flour blending regulation requiring the incorporation of underutilized crops to fill the maize deficit in the country is to be passed. Agriculture stakeholders now say production of the alternative for the country's staple per acre can be increased fivefold if farmers are more open to genetically modified cassava. Take a look.
Currently, cassava farmers in Kenya reap an average 14 tons of yield per acre per season, a shortfall from a potential 50 tons per acre if farmers partake in climate-smart agriculture and embrace the genetically modified variety of the tuber.
The yields are quite low in Kenya compared to some other regions.
Demand for the maize alternative is growing in popularity as the government fast-tracks the flour blending regulation, where a considerable percentage of the product will be infused with cassava.
The bigger issue for the regulation has been the data backup that will inform the 10% cassava blend, because that is the minimum requirement in that regulation. So where is the data to support the minimum percentage requirement of the cassava blend?
The Kenya Bureau of Standards is already formulating a measure of control to regulate the measurements to ensure it is fit for human consumption.
We have already done work also with KEBS because, for the regulation to come into place, you have to have other supporting document and procedures. So you cannot pass a regulation on flour blend without a standard to certify those products.
Already a number of private millers incorporate the alternative. However, it is a dismal 0.04% to 1% of the original maize blend.
Starting from government, if the counties where cassava is being produced are not selecting cassava as a priority value chain, it's going to be very difficult to push this.
Agriculture stakeholders are terming this as a salvation of the current depleted food basket, where maize produced per year stands at a little over 40 million bags, in comparison to the local need of approximately 65 million bags. As far as food security is concerned, the maize deficit in the country has been a cause for concern for the government. But now, with the milling of tubers, the government does realize that maybe there is a solution in the offing. Hibak Said for TV47.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Hibak, for that report. Time now for the People's Court right here on the Daily Report. We thank you for staying with us, as I did inform you on the People's Court. And as you're aware, we are not usually alone. Victor Muyakane is on the other side of the studio, as well as Linda Alela. We are looking at the state of Kenya's security. Kenya's state.
The government that went by and the current dispensation, when you have new figureheads on top of a machinery, and more specifically, a security machinery that's very high reliability, then chances are you're expecting quite some changes to actually happen. In this particular situation, they could be good or bad, but we know the function of leadership is pretty critical, especially for very high reliability organizations that security is, and particularly to the kind of questions that we are faced with today. You'd want to say that from where I sit, there's not so much that inspires optimism in the fact that the changes thereof that did take place inspired confidence in terms of the way things are being done, and or just the slowdown in terms of that, just that operational momentum being carried to the next level. So from what we have seen in the recent past, and more specifically what's going on in the North Rift, you'd want to say that history is informing us, but a lot of questions are being asked that need better answers in terms of the perennial cases of, say, banditry, and sadly for what happened in the most recent past with the GSU station being, very boldly surrounded by bandits. That should send a signal, and a strong signal, because that's not something that you've seen. I think the last that I know of that having happened is when we did do an operation to counter insurgency in Mount Elgon. That's way back in 2008, or the years running up to that. We had brazen attacks at police stations. So that could be coming back. So questions are being asked as to whether we are getting things wrong at this point in time that may have been gotten right for a long time between 2008 and the most recent past. I mean, the jury is still out on those questions, but from where I sit, I think there's got to be a lot to be done in terms of just the maintenance of that momentum, if there was a good one, and also to address the bigger issues that are informing these acts of criminality from the psychological perspective, and of course from the causal factors that have informed the same.
Absolutely. And, important and pertinent points that you raised there, Baron. I'm curious, insofar as operation and implementation of some of the policies, because you've seen, for instance, the bandit attacks, the KDF was involved, and, a lot seems to be happening in terms of deployment and all, but the result seems to be opposite, a reverse of, what seems to be in the pipeline, or rather what has been set even as policies. What do you think that perhaps, especially for this region that has had perennial attacks, we've been pouring new wine into old wineskins, we've been doing the same thing perhaps, expecting different results. Is it very difficult to implement what would be, quote unquote, a radical solution, whereas, it may have far-reaching implications? But why do we seem to be, just caressing the situation and saying we will address it, but in terms of implementation, there are other issues that come along?
Well, interesting question that is. You came close to calling them band-aids, right?
Yeah.
Or aspirin solutions. Well, radical as they may sound, from where you sit, from the strategic perspectives, so from where I know the very well-tuned processes in terms of operational matters that are going to be put in place to fight wars, fight banditry for that matter. Strategy has some main components, that the who, what, how. I feel in the grand scheme of things that there's got to be very serious conversations around the who, what, how in terms of the strategy. So businessmen would call the strategic misintents that are generating those negative results, or negative transfer. So good intellect, bad place. We were discussing offset, and what I've had to say, on platforms such as this, is that there's quite a lot of elements of psychological research. There's a lot of research findings that have been done. There's a lot of studies that have been done by scholars that have found out that beyond the extension of the muzzle of the gun, the soft approaches that got to meet, at some point in time, or the weaving together of the soft and the hard approaches in order to actually uproot the root causes of this problem. So when I hear people saying, we are going to go into this enclave and finish this problem once and for all, what are you finishing? They may be lacking in imagination at some point in time where the causal factors are left with the band-aids on them. So you finished the problem in terms of just addressing the what you see manifest in terms of the symptoms, but you fail in large scale in terms of addressing the root causes of those problems. And that's where some of the softer approaches, where the winning of the hearts and the minds of the people, and you could classify them under what Johan Galtung talked about in his studies, the structure of violence theory in 1969, and where the organization or the way the society is actually structured and formed in itself, in and of itself, may cause violence or cause people to actually get into places where these crimes are occurring when they are denied access to their basic needs. And when you sample some of these areas that we are talking about, in the North Rift most particularly, the hardship that build tents there, Kujenga Hema, I think George may be happy to hear that. It's quite appalling. Okay, so when you're considering even just the basic needs, the suffering that's going on in those kind of places, so if you were to structure yourself around those things, you're thinking, what alternatives do we give these people there to prevent them from choosing this bad alternative? Do we build roads? Do we take the government presence there? And some of the discussions we've had have been about having these people, because when you're coming from some of these places, Turkana, and you hear people saying, tunaenda Kenya, then it gets to shock you quite a bit for you and I who's in aircon rooms and in townships such as this. But when you are dropped in that enclave in itself, even just to hang around and just have a bit of fun, it's quite crazy. So the narrative that they've known over time is that the basic needs that they have, which is their cows, which have got to go and graze, their pastoralists, so they don't know about these artificial borders, what you have with the electoral boundaries and commissions that are there. They don't know about this. For them, they know we used to go across and just graze our cows. But ignorance is not defense before law, as they say. But that said, why don't we ensure that these people are weeded off the silos of their beliefs that they had in the past and the aspirations that they had, and approach them with superior narratives, and or preserve their belief systems, but make them better in terms of bringing in the goodies closer. So the sharing of the national cake. So when you have some total look of all these factors, I feel fairly much that's why we've done poorly, because we may be addressing the symptoms, but we fail in addressing the root causes of these problems.
Absolutely. A great way to start this show with Byron Odera, security expert. Indeed, so much that we are unpacking tonight for you. But even as you look at the whole situation on security, the points that have been raised by my guest on this, and Victor Muyakana is on the other side with a human rights lawyer, because this involves people, and so much happens in terms of the issues of the in terms of when you look even at the whole issue of human rights, when you look at the issues that surround the deaths that come in and dealing with people. I wonder what your guest has to say regarding the balance that you have to do with security organizations, the operations, and dealing with the victims and of course the families. Over to you, Victor.
Oh yeah, thank you, George, and a very enlightening opener right there from your guest. Good people, we are joined by Stella Oyagi, who's actually a lawyer who's got quite a few areas of focus, including SGBV, human rights, international human rights, and so much more. Actually, you wear quite a number of hats. So welcome to our show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Right off the bat, there's a question that George asked, but before that, would you give us your view on the event that happened this morning in Baringo, as well as the other attacks that have been happening across the country?
It's unfortunate that, first of all, it's the children who had to experience this firsthand. I can imagine the trauma that is left on the children. Hearing gunshots for like a whole hour. This is not normal in any given circumstance. And yet it happened where it's considered to be the safest place in a JSU camp.
That's right.
And how did the attack happen? They were not aware. before they rescued the children, it was unfortunate. And I know this has happened in various parts of the country for long. Unfortunately, it's the vulnerable that suffer the most, the children, the women, and the young girls. Because you see, like, for schools have to be closed whenever these attacks happen. Kids miss school because you're not sure when you go, will you get back home, will you reach school safely? And the government has not really put in place proper mechanisms to protect the vulnerable in our society. So that is a gap in itself that needs to be addressed urgently, because kids from these particular areas where there is a lot of conflict are the ones who miss out. They miss out on the basics because there is poor infrastructure. They miss out on education because of the attacks. And women, of course, they have to, even the women get violated sexually, sexual harassment. And getting help is a problem because of accessing the facilities, accessing hospitals is a challenge. So there's a lot that needs to be done by our governments, yes.
Right. And I think one of the key concerns is that in rights.
First of all, I think the government mostly focuses on one approach of dealing with the problem. You attack, we come and protect. But it has failed to address the root cause. Why do these people have conflicts every other time? It's the same areas most of the time that have these kind of problems. So you realize that most of these places are in the northern part of Kenya, where it is a hardship area. They don't have resources. So they are fighting for the little resource that is there. We've had a consistent drought for like the past 3-4 years. So shortage of rain. And these people are pastoralists. So they cannot, they go for long distances to feed their cattle. And they fight for these small resources plus the water and the land. So if the government fails to address the problem itself, and it keeps going, you send your militia, you send your police, you send your armed forces, but you've not actually dealt with the problem on the ground. The people themselves are fighting over the same resources that they don't have. So if the government addresses the problem first, then it is a one way of managing this problem and reducing probably the conflicts. Yes.
I see. And we're seeing different kinds of conflict, different kinds of insecurity, if we may call it that, across the country. Down in Lamu, we've got what is suspected to be terror-motivated attacks. Over across the country in Sondu, we've got a different kind of community clashes. In the cities or in all the urban centers in the country, we've got what looks like a spike in petty crime. We've also got organized crime on the other hand, doing its thing. We're seeing a lot more on the drug front. We're seeing a lot more on the illegal arms front, human trafficking and so on. What does this bode for our sense as a country of human rights?
It means that, first of all, who are the perpetrators mostly? If you look at like the list of the names that were put out there for the suspected terror attackers in Lamu, they are young people. What do they lack? Probably it's unemployment. You find that most of these people, because of being idle for too long, and you get incentives by joining these terrorist groups, they lure you with money, they lure you with opportunities that you may not have in your country. It is sweeter that way. So they opt to go and test the waters that side. Unfortunately, we are the ones who suffer. It affects us because any attack affects all of us. It violates our rights because your security is not secured. You're not guaranteed of walking safely, going to work safely because we've seen instances like where like the Westgate Mall, it was attacked by terrorists. It was not predicted. Innocent people lost their lives. So if the government can look at addressing the challenges that the youth face, because they are the majority, the population, the higher population in Kenya. That is one way of probably dealing with the radicalization that is there, the recruitment of young people. Right. And therefore, it means the Kenyans get to enjoy their rights because the government is making steps towards protecting us from such different forms of violation.
Right.
Yeah.
One of the most common things people say when they're arrested in Kenya is, I know my rights. We'll come back to that in a moment. But on the other side of the studio, good people, is Linda Alela, and she's got a power-packed panel right over there. Without further ado, over to you, Linda.
Oh, Victor, guaranteed security too is a human right and enshrined in the Constitution for that very matter. But there seems to be a general agreement in the room that perhaps as a country, we haven't gotten the security aspect right. Today we talk about Kenya's state of security, but the reports do not look so promising. And so the question then would be, first of all, what is it that we have in our hands that would help us deal with the question of insecurity in this case? With me is George Musamali, who's a security expert, seated right next to me. And on my farthest left is John Kinuthia, who's a security advisor as well as a leadership consultant. Let's start with you, Kinuthia. Quick one. What is this that we have in our hands? Lots of monies channeled towards addressing the questions of security, laws, that would address the question of insecurity. We have members of parliament at the level of the legislative level, addressing the question of insecurity. Do we seem to have enough that would help us address the insecurities that we witness today? Today we've narrowed down on banditry, we've narrowed down on terrorism, and these petty crimes, but there's more to that.
Thanks, Linda. And the first thing I would say is it's good to look at context. If you zoom out a little, most of my domain covers national security in an international context. Recently, one of Kenya's allies, Israel, got one of their worst attacks in history. Israel, anybody who's familiar with their defense forces, they're one of the best equipped, best trained. They actually train our people. They have all kinds of, surveillance, electronic, intelligence, every capability that a modern force should have.
Right.
They were hit with a surprise attack that pretty much, all kinds of agreement is that there was some intelligence failure or some other failure, but they were hit in a surprise attack that really cost them, 1,300 lives of their own people, and now, so many more lives are being lost, and it's escalating into a regional conflict. So I think the first thing we need to do is, when we put context and zoom out like that, we shouldn't beat ourselves up too much, because this happens to the best of them in the world. So that's the first part of the question. Now, coming to a local context, my brother Byron and my sister Stella really nailed it. Security is a very dynamic field, and there are so many layers that go into play. The kind of attack we saw today, we are calling it banditry, but from a professional point of view, it's really what is called a guerrilla attack, which means, it may be a ragtag army, it may be, some rebel forces, it may be some group of people who've banded up together. Irrespective, guerrilla attacks, they maximize on that element of surprise. They look where the government forces are least likely to respond immediately and quickly. And the very nature of guerrilla attacks, just like the one in Israel, lends itself to a certain element of surprise.
Could I ask this?
Yes, please.
What do you mean when you say where the government is, unlikely to respond immediately? This is a GSU camp that we are talking about.
Yes.
And some of the people are asking, how daring can human beings be?
So there are a lot of factors that go into that. Again, I'll go back to the other context. One of the reasons the Israeli context was hit so much is they had removed their forces from Gaza and focused on the West Bank, and that's where a lot of the operational focus was. Even here, this area has been a subject of operations for quite a while, but again, the security forces will move their capabilities according to what is going on the ground. So a person who's launching a guerrilla attack will study for quite a while. It may be a GSU camp, but people may be deployed, others coming in, others coming out at a particular time of day. There's a lot that goes into that. Now, the best way to contextualize this is to understand that the one thing, and to answer your question, we have a lot of resources. You mentioned them. We have the financial resources. We have the 3 branches of government. On one side, the executive, the other one, the legislature, and then the judiciary, all coming together to enable from a policy, from a legal and other sort of points of view. But now, security being so dynamic, it's important to remember, Byron kind of touched on it. The one thing that matters the most is something called strategy. Strategy is a Greek word, comes from the Greek word strategos, which means army leader or military general. The idea of being strategic means that even if you have the least resources, even if you have the most unpredictable sort of circumstance, you can be able to craft strategies that address, because all these security incidents we state are very different. Today, Stella mentioned the effect on children. Today, children were actually directly affected because there was a school. Exactly. And they had, I believe, 227 candidates, and those dynamics change. So the important thing is to for the government to develop a strategic approach that is future-looking. To a large extent, we have been reactive in the past. So when these things happen is when we deploy. That's when, you know, a lot of mobilization is done. But the kind of enemies we are dealing with today, from a national point of view, from even a regional point of view, require upping the game in terms of strategy. Now, some of the factors that come into play are very important. One is there's geopolitics. The geo part, like Stella said, a lot of these areas will usually be the northern parts or the remote parts or, you know, hardship areas. So that is a factor. The politics part of geopolitics, sometimes there's a lot that is under the radar that needs to be examined. You know, sometimes there are local political factions.
Right.
You always hear a story that there's a suspected financier who's a local politician or some other aspect of geopolitics.
I want to take it away from you briefly before we take a quick short break and perhaps just look at the leadership aspect of it, because fact is that, yes, strategy has to always be up. We keep asking ourselves, Al-Shabaab is way ahead of us in terms of strategy. Before you realize it, an attack has been launched and all that. In terms of just looking at the government and the way it's handling the matters of security today, just taking note of the fact that we've also seen data being released as to this ministry being the best performing ministry, that is the security or interior ministry. Do you suppose it is the case? Do you suppose they're in the right track?
Let me start by saying this, that I think the Kenya Kwanza government inherited a cocktail of security challenges. And what they're handling is not even supposed to be their cup of tea. We had previous governments. And when we look at the situation in northern Kenya and other parts of the country per se, you realize that this is a problem that has been with us for quite some time. And as Byron has said and John has said here, we are always dealing with this using tactics.
You see,
we don't have a strategy. Let me say that. Because if you go back to history, you realize that the first military operation in northern Kenya, I mean North Rift Kenya, was in 1908. To date, we're still having military operations in that area. So what are we not getting right? That is the question.
And that's basically it, because the student in this primary school, Kapinda Som, will not understand that it was the previous government, that Kenya Kwanza has inherited, you know, a lot of cocktail of security challenges. They will not understand why is it that, their school was closed sometime in 2019 because of the question of insecurity, and it's been closed for the longest of time, opened recently, and again there is an attack. They might never get to understand who is in charge. Allow us to take a short break, and then we come back to you and perhaps unpack this some more after this short break.
Buda, Freebet imejipa. Wekelea uzito. Cheza MB8. Bet bila stake. Predict the outcome of 8 pre-selected games and win up to 100,000 shillings. Only at maybet.com. Radio 47 tuko nawe mchana kutwa na usiku kucha. 101.8 Garissa. Tunavuma na bado.
Welcome back to the broadcast. This is People's Court on Daily Report, and Victor Moyakani is with Stella Oyagi, as well as George Maringa, who has bride on Adara, and with me on this very end is John Kinuthia, as well as George Musamali, as we unpack the security situation in the country. I cut you short while you're trying to, get us to understand what are some of the reasons why we all think, or you might actually imagine that, we are not getting it right in terms of addressing the question of, insecurity. It is difficult not to look at the government of the day. It is difficult not to question the government of the day, because my assumption is that if these problems were there in the previous government, we have a new government that is coming in with lots of promises, with lots of guarantees, then we can only look at them and ask, so then what, now that you're in?
Yes, Linda, I believe what I was trying to bring out is that this government is also using the same tactics that were being used by the previous governments. Okay. And that is why we will not succeed. It's not easy for you to come, organize, and attack a GSU camp. I served in those areas and I know. We've seen several attacks in GSU camps. I've lost friends, people I've worked with, people I know. And you'll find that as I was trying to bring this out, is that we've been having military operations. Every other time, we've been using hard power on those people. We've not looked at the root cause of the problem and tried to address that problem. We've not come up with strategy in dealing with this problem.
Who is supposed to bring this form of strategy?
And it's supposed to come from government and all other players. I mean, we have the judiciary, we have parliament, we have the security apparatus. They need to sit down and come up with a better way of dealing with this situation.
Are you who are parts of this, or who are stakeholders, sometimes given or accorded the chance to as well give proposals in terms of the...
Linda, we've been talking about this. I believe you've been in those areas. If you go to Baringo, if you go to Marakwet, if you go to places like Tot, we have places, Dodonyang, these people are used to this kind of life. When they see government, they see military operations. When they see government, they see police operations. When they see government, they see a chief who will come with threats to the community. We've seen disarmaments that have been taking place in those areas from time immemorial. Nothing has changed. Any form of development in those areas, it's either done by the church, or those schools you're talking about have not been built by the government. They have been constructed by the church, they have been constructed by NGOs, they have been, boreholes, name it. And then the only time government goes in is coming and saying there's a lot of insecurity in this area, we need to come with hard power and deal with this problem.
Victor and I have had a conversation in, trying to compare the situation in Uganda and Kenya. And we say in Uganda then, because the Karamojong situation has been calmed down by Museveni. A friend of former President Uhuru Kenyatta, a friend of Daniel Toroitich Arap Moi, may his soul rest in eternal peace, of Mwai Kibaki, and today a friend of Dr. William Samoei Ruto. Why is it that he has managed to tame this at that level and we are not doing it?
Across the border, Linda, when we were having, in Kenya, when Moi was having Operation Nyundo, Museveni was doing different things. Museveni was opening up the area. Museveni was building roads. Museveni was constructing dams, changing the lifestyle of his people, talking to them, bringing development close to these people. And you see now the dynamics there. They are so different with what we are facing here.
Right.
When we are using hard power, Museveni was using both hard power and soft power. And in fact, if you look at the history of Uganda, Janet Museveni was made the minister for Karamojong. He pumped money there so that the people would feel like they're part of Uganda. But as opposed to Kenya, every other time, we don't take development to these people. And what you're playing in Baringo and Pokot and whatever is what we call military economics. You look at that area and say, what are we getting out of this? These military operations will not last. because it will become too expensive for us to sustain them. So we need to have a different approach, and as Byron has said and John has said, we need strategy, not tactics.
Well, maybe as well
tactics.
Goodwill.
This government has come in, it has gone there, Kindiki has gone there, he has promised action. What action has he done? Build military camps in those areas.
George,
is this what the people want?
All right.
That is the big question.
Well, George, I'll come back to you. Allow me to go back to the other side where George is. George, that is just on the question of banditry. We have not talked terrorism. We have not talked, petty crimes and basically what the small cases of theft that we get to witness here. And we ask ourselves, just where are we headed? Just how much will the terrorists fear us if we cannot even manage the situation back at home? George.
Absolutely pertinent, of course, issues raised on your end by your panelists. On my end, I still have Byron Adera as security expert as well. But before we get to hear more, regarding the operations that are going on, I want us to cross over to West Pokot and listen to what the residents there had to say regarding this whole issue.
Tunaomba sana Kindiki, achana mambo ya kuongea redioni, achana mambo ya kuongea TV, kucha chini, shuka chini, mambo uanza chini, alafu ongea na viongozi, na wewe pia waachana kutia wakati unatatua maneno, mambo ya vita, mambo ya amani haitaki hasira. Inataka mtu kutulia na kuongea vizuri.
Wakora ambayo wanajificha kwa msitu inataka security force, sio ya kupembeleza. Kuna wakora wamejificha both Marakwet na Pokot ndani ya msitu ya serikali na wameumiza wananchi.
Kama sisi si wa Kenya kama wengine, na kama sisi hatuna haki ya kunufaika kutokana na hii serikali ambayo ni yetu kwa kupewa NPR kama wengine, kuamiwe. And that's not demanding too much, because hata wakati mmoja tulikuwa DOD tukaelezwa na wale KDF wakati ya presentation kwamba challenge moja wako naye ni kwamba wale wengine wote wamepewa NPR, lakini Pokot ya Tiati na Pokot ya West Pokot hawajapewa. Kwa nini?
West Pokot iko dunia gani? Iko dunia ya Kenya ama iko dunia gani? Kwa hivyo vile wenzangu wamesema, Kindiki atujibu mbona sisi tunapakuliwa wasi hivi.
Waziri Kindiki umekuja kuongea mambo mingi katika kaunti ya West Pokot. Umesema utaleta KPR, utaresolve mambo ya mashule ya West Pokot. Saizi tuko Surumben na watoto ya Cheptural Boys wako hapa Surumben kwa sababu ya shida ya amani. Wenye wangetakana wakue upande wa Cheptural wako hapa Surumben saizi. Na waziri Kindiki uliongea mambo mingi ya kutuchosha akili hapo awali. Kwa hivyo tungekuomba kama wewe unamaanisha yale ulikuwa unasema kwa amani, utupatie NPR ama sisi tutengeneze NPR yetu hapa West Pokot. Hata kama ndio anatengeneza NPR, hatuwezi shinda kulipa NPR.
Yeah, Byron, you've heard what the residents of West Pokot have had to say. The first one actually said Kindiki, the Interior CS, Professor Kithure Kindiki, needs to go on the ground. You have seen him traversing this country, but are such calls really what would inspire confidence? Because it would appear that the presence of government seems not to be felt.
Yes, interesting question right there, George, and that's what we discussed during the first segment of this conversation, that when you are an individual from some of these places within the territorial borders of Kenya, then you hear such conversations of people going to Kenya, the real Kenya now, when they're coming from Pokot, they're coming from Turkana, such like enclaves in this nation. And so they call to have, for them, the imagination is the government is that figurehead, and Kindiki, so rightfully so, they're in charge of security. And remember, security is literally a basic need as it is. So these people are validly, concerned about the lack of security and the suffering that's going on. And as the other panelists have said, George, John, and Madam Sheila here, is that we've had this problem for far too long. It's been a perennial problem that's been sitting on the backside of Kenya for quite a long time. And so, as Linda was asking the other panelists, you cannot have the government of the day, removed from the theater of the discussions of this problem. Because you don't say, oh, I inherited this, and so we can approach it lackluster way. So the valid concerns that you've had, and of course the varied perspectives as regards the opinions thereof, others are thinking you come in with the hard force and remove or uproot this problem, because we know where they're hiding. So these are key stakeholders. The others are saying, stop all this talk and no play, or play in quotes. You know, come here and do the deed, so that we may have to start to see that meaningful changes with regards to addressing the perennial security challenges that have been in these areas for far too long. But that said, I'd love to get back to the kind of studies that have been done, yes. And Madam Sheila did intimate to the same. For far too long, there's been studies around the security situations. And when you remove the basic needs, as we are saying, and we are calling them, and you have a part of the populace that are believing, in and of itself, that they are not part of the national cake, then they are socialized in some aspirations that may be skewed, that may not make sense to you and I. Robert Martin, in some study that was put together between 1938 and 1957, talked about the strain and anomaly theory, and when he said the deviant behaviors occur when conventional aspirations exceed the level of satisfaction that's associated with the legitimate behavior. Legitimate behavior, debatable. But when you conceptualize, when the legitimate behavior is removed, people get to conceptualize acts of criminality or crime as the other means to get to those conventional aspirations. And the conventional aspirations can be as basic as our basic needs. So it would shock you and I that someone is going to raid a GSU camp in order to remove, maybe if they're thinking that's the thorn that's sitting under their feet, to remove them there so they can pretty much go and fetch their cows. Because the belief here is our basic needs only rely on these cows. There's that kind of belief. And it's something that's been carried on for quite some time. So it's traditions die hard, as they call it. So in a sense, you have to have the strategies that I'll be discussing here, which will weave together all these hard and other soft approaches. And the soft approaches we're talking about are listening into the conversations that are going on among the key stakeholders, that the populace, that the consumers, that the basic needs, the security provisions are. And saying, I've been coexisting with George, but I don't think George has ownership of cows. That's my belief. What do we do about this kind of conflict that's going to be brewing up? And that's going to be inviting the government presence to try to resolve the situation, possibly kill George and reward me, or in a way do other things. So that strategy, so the who, what, and how these things are done are very, very critical. And that's where you sit down, you calm things down. I had one of the residents saying, like, you need to actually be very calm. You don't have to post a very hard and mean exterior to be a security person. I don't think I look like that. Deadly as the special forces come. So you just need to have some very well construed ideas, which are boiled down to this strategy, the who, what, and how. And it's very critical. Where George and I are the tactical end of the tip of the spear that are doing the deeds, you have to be very measured. And we have operational orders that say these are the limits of exploitation. These are the rules of engagement. So issues that have come up, and when we've seen some of the operations, very well-intended strategies that are supposed to carry at the bottom end, which is the tactical delivery, then you have people being rounded up, and we've seen some of that happening in this nation. People rounded up and pushed into stadia, and they beat them senseless. Or when something is said, we are going to have an operation somewhere, and you hear of other cases, excesses on the parts of individuals perhaps, where women are raped, children are tortured, other people are killed. Then these things will get to actually score. They're counterintuitive. They get to score negative goals, and in a sense, they get to embolden people to actually get on a southward drift, where you want a populace to actually go towards the North Star. Yeah,
when you look at even at the, when you talk about the who, what, and how, when you look at, for a government that wants to end this, whatever they're calling the menace, and at the same time, sending of police officers to, our countries like Haiti. When you juxtapose how we seem to even have successes, as has been reported even by the military, by the Interior CS himself, why does it seem that locally and here at home, we seem not to be getting the how correct in terms of even when you look even at the optics of such deployments, the ratios that we have, but in terms of deploying to such areas that are critical, areas that have been declared disturbed in the past, it seems, even as you talked about it in the first session and even now, when you look at the projections of the future, what are some of the solutions that you would offer and say, okay, fine, we've been doing this for the last 60 years, let's face a different approach?
Well, I'm an optimist, and I sure hope that we look at Project Kenya from that perspective for all of us, because we are very key stakeholders as well. People suffering half a world away, in Turkana, in Pokot, can pretty much be all affected in one way or another. And so when we are staring in the face of these challenges, be it the banditry that's happening somewhere, the guerrilla warfare that are taking place, and they've been strife that are taking place in Elgon, it has to wake someone up from half a world away as well to go and solve that problem. Some of us did take part in some of these operations and elsewhere as well. And as they say, of course, any mistake that's happening today with the history of socialization and the speed of movement of people, even mobility itself, is not private and secret anymore. They're all both public and very global in their impact. And so something that's upsetting peace and security in Turkana could translate into someone becoming a terrorist that's going to be spraying you with bullets in the middle of township like Westgate or other places such as that. And so we have to be very, very careful going forward with regards to the way we do things, because we don't have any other country. My optimism is probably inspired by the fact that, the Constitution itself has pretty much spelled itself very clearly with the changes that did happen in 2010. And which, of course, did pronounce changes on, police force into police service. So, in a sense, that is already a big thing. But maybe we have to, leave the true spirit of what was envisaged in the Constitution with regards to changes in mindsets. That is one. Leadership is a strong thing, and leadership is a game changer. When you have a force, and we're discussing this in a different fora way back in 2017, when our NPS then was heavily indicted, and we were ranked third worst police service in the whole world by World Internal Security and Police Index, WISP, in conjunction with IEP, the Institute of Economics and Policy. That was a huge indictment. And I remember on TV then I said, much as someone can be calling me a bad name, and it may be as illegitimate, let's say, as it gets, but it's something that's coming from, as they say, alligator coming from the lake and reporting where the frog is sick. You take it with a pinch of salt, yes, but you ask yourself critical questions. And the domains that are considered then, if I were to talk squarely on the National Police Service, that is quite a strong body, I sure hope, and that can get to fix some of these problems affecting us. The domains were processes, capacity, legitimacy, and outcomes. These are the four domains that are profiled by these global bodies. If we have a look at the processes, so to speak, we are looking at, and all of us is open source information or intelligence, how people get to even to the force itself or the service itself through, maybe there's issues of corruption, and this is the one single most important factor in the whole game plan of security here, and which we are thinking people corruptly get into it. So maybe wrong raw materials are getting into this very high reliability organization that you want to fight issues of crime and criminality with. You're looking at capacity, and capacity is not just the hardware. When we've employed equipment, computers, like what we have here, all these things, the human factor and the motives involved are pretty much the most important bit about them. Computers will work by themselves, but then again, maybe just 2 seconds. If you're looking at the legitimacy, the spirit of the general populace, the regard that we have for our service. So if all these things can be improved even along those four domains itself, I'm hopeful that we shall have a better country. We shall have a more peaceful people. Even just the inspiration that I'm hopeful that you have stepped in the police station. If I don't need to walk with a gun and hold this police station at the gun point or something, or, we can walk in and have tea and discuss our challenges. And these things may get to the desk of the commander-in-chief, who may want to rally his people around him, the cabinet, and say, well, Project Kenya is going to work because of that little bit work of kindness that we saw elsewhere.
Okay.
Thank you.
Change of strategy, change of mindset. Victor, over to you. I wonder, what some of the issues that, your guest has been deliberating upon, even as you look at the humanitarian aspect of it all, and at the center of it all, people are involved.
Oh yeah. At the center of everything is people. I want to read you, and dear Kenyans who are watching, a quote from somebody called Anne Morrow Lindbergh. And she says, "Only in growth, in reform, and change, paradoxically enough, is true security found." Only in growth, reform, and change is true security found. From where you sit, what needs to grow, or what do we need to grow out of? What needs to be reformed, and what needs to be changed for us to achieve security in this country?
Thanks, Victor. I feel like one of the ways that we can reform what is currently ongoing, the government needs to involve the people in getting solutions to ending the insecurity in those areas. It is the people who will come with the solutions because they know what causes the problems to the insecurity in those areas. We talked about the limited resources being one of the reasons as to why people are fighting in those areas. I know the government has embraced using civilians to fight the militia by the using the NPR. It is a good strategy, but it is one strategy. There are many other solutions that the government can apply to fight or manage the insecurity. Secondly, guarding our borders. We have very porous borders. The government should...
In fact, just on that point,
yes.
On a recent trip to Turkana, we found out Turkana is surrounded by at least three borders, and the guns that keep coming, and all those countries actually have various levels of conflict.
Exactly.
So there's guns, assault rifles, and other kinds of arms that are coming in fairly easily.
Exactly. Now that is the reason. You see, it is easier to access these illegal firearms from countries that have are not very peaceful because the borders are porous and there is corruption. So if we need
to safeguard the border.
Definitely. Put in technology that can screen and share information in real time across all borders so that we screen who is coming in, what is coming into the country. That is one way of protecting our people and also ensuring that we don't have these illegal firearms in our country. Thirdly, if looking at our laws and the gaps, because there are many, that will be one way of addressing the gaps in terms of managing the insecurity in our country.
What are some of these things that you feel are gaps and how would we address them?
Currently, what we have is the penal code that deals with insecurity. It has not really defined, other than the insecurity, the assault, the rapes, the normal offenses. I feel that this banditry and offenses related to banditry and insecurity should be defined in such a way that even the penalties are enhanced. That way it will curb the rise in the violence that we see rampantly in our country. Yes, so because the punishments that are there already are very minimal. So you arrest me, I go to court, I pay my fine, I go back, I buy my firearm, and then I continue with what I'm doing. Involving the people is important because most people living in those areas feel like they are their own security. Working with a firearm is very easy for them because they feel like the government has not sent in the necessary mechanisms to protect them. So getting them to surrender. You've seen several times the government saying surrender. Today we have an amnesty for a week. Bring back your firearms, will not be charged. But they rarely surrender because it is for a short period. You come, you take them from us, then you go back to the cities and you leave us to fend for ourselves. So that is not a solution. Get the solution from the people on the ground. Send enough personnel and provide infrastructure for them to actually live in peace.
Right.
Yeah.
Earlier we said one of the things here in Kenya that happens, especially in urban areas, if you get arrested by the police, you say, I know my rights. First, do we actually, in your experience, do we know our rights? And what advantages does knowing one's rights afford to a person in a state where there might be something going wrong?
I can say there are people who know their rights, but they assume they know their rights, but they may be misguided. I can say that you have the right to know what you're being arrested for, why you're arresting me. you have the right to be represented by a person of your choice. If you want an advocate, you have the right to access one. You have the right to be presented in court within the nearest possible time, within 24 hours, unless it's a public holiday or it falls on a weekend. You have the right to a fair trial. The right that most people maybe do not know is you have the right to be presumed innocent until you're proven guilty. I know even as we judge people, you see, like there's a story and you judge he's guilty even before the hearing is the case is heard and sentence meted out. But you should be presumed innocent until otherwise. And then you have the right to bail or bond, but that right is also not, it is not automatic, it is not 100% guaranteed. There may be circumstances where your bond or bail may be denied for your own security reasons. If someone probably is arrested by virtue of a mob justice, and the police feel like if you're released back to the community, you'll be killed. So they'd rather
for your own good.
Exactly. They detain you in custody for some time until it cools down or for some other reason. So it is not really automatic unless there are other circumstances that may necessitate you being denied bond. Yes.
Right. And just before we shift gears to where Linda is at the moment, we are looking at there's a recent report that looked at the reason why petty crime is spiking and organized crime and so on. And one of the things, though many things were said there, one of the things that jumped out of the page at me is the remand system. And particularly that there's a lot of indignity in how we treat suspects. Not people who've been convicted, but suspects. What can you say about that?
I feel like who handles the arrest parts of the remand it is the NPS and the law enforcement agencies. Probably from their training, they are trained to prevent and curb. You come with some level of force. Human rights come second. So it emanates from that. That is why you find there's a lot of indignity, because I'll arrest you with force because I'll assume you'll resist. I'll put you in a very undignified cell because I feel you have violated someone's rights, so why should you enjoy the peace, the quiet, the cleanliness? So it requires a lot of probably retraining of our NPS and taking care of our institutions, just so that you know that human rights does not really apply when you go to court. It applies from the time you're arrested to the time you're arraigned in court, even during investigations, how you handle the victims, even the suspects. So human rights should be applied everywhere. So probably the NPS and other law enforcement agencies need to be trained on how to uphold the rights of suspects.
Right.
Yes.
So I think that would fall under the change aspect. We were talking about growth, reform, and change. And just as we shift over to Linda, somebody pointed out something quite interesting. They said, even how we handle the victims of crimes is quite undignified, including even how we transfer the bodies of those who lose their lives from crime. People just get shoved in the back of the police truck and carted to the hospital or to the mortuary. Possibly some of the other things we need to change.
True.
Linda, reform, change, what do you people have to say about that?
We're going to look at that because all this then would fall under the umbrella of policy. And therein there's law, there's strategy, the numerous declarations that will always have, the structures. And then we ask ourselves, have we stagnated the old policies that we once had, so that today we can confidently say that nothing is happening because we have not changed tactic? We're coming to respond to that. But then again, I doubt there's any kind of report that will be written in this country in relation to security, and that it would miss the reports of Lamu, Peketodi to be precise. The numerous attacks there, up to date. There are times where we'll say it's suspected Al-Shabaab attacks. There are times we're asking ourselves just, what attacks, what kind of attacks are this one? So let's listen in to what the people of Lamu have to say about that, and then we come back to your question, Vicky.
Hii mashambulizi yanaweza kuwa mengine yanaonekana yanaingia kwa sababu sisi wenyewe hatuko pamoja, na kitu ambacho kinaweza kusababisha mashambulizi yakawa yamepungua au yakatoweka kabisa ni kwamba sote wananchi na serikali na wahusika wote tuwe kitu kimoja ili tuweze kuangamiza mambo haya ambayo yanajitokeza kwa ajili ya ugaidi na kutimiza malengo yao.
Mambo ya kigaidi yamekuwa kisungumkuti katika kaunti yetu ya Lamu. Na sio tu tukisikiza kama Garissa, Wajir, Mandera, vitu kama hivyo vinaendeleweka na vinasikika katika vyombo vya habari. Lakini kitu kimoja ningeomba hivi katika serikali yetu kwa wakati huu. Kunao ambao wanajua hawa wahalifu na wanajua pahali wanaishi. Sana sana tukiangalia ndio iweze kuisha kabisa hawa watu ambao wanafuga ng'ombe, wanajua kwa sababu wanakutana na wao huko mwituni.
Nikianza na kusema ya kwamba nyakati hizi ambazo tuko nazo, maendeleo yamezidi kuinuka na kuendelea sana, na watu pia wamezidi kuelimika, na watu wamezidi pia kuongezeka. Kwa hivyo kile cha muhimu ambacho ningeona kinaweza kufaa Lamu County ni kuja pamoja, kukaa pamoja, kuongea kwa pamoja ili tuweze kushirikiana na tuweze kujenga eneo hili ya Lamu County kwa pamoja.
Na kulingana na utovu wa usalama wenye uko katika Lamu County, ningeomba tu serikali ikae macho kwa sababu ya kulinda wananchi. Kwa sababu kumekuwa na matatizo kila kuchona sikia huku kumekaa hivi, mara nyumba zimechomwa, kanisa zimeteketezwa, na serikali ingekaa macho ilinde wananchi na mali yao, tungepata afueni. Alafu inaweza ikaunda kamati ambayo itakuwa inasaidia serikali kutoa habari kamili ya kusaidia serikali kutafuta hawa majangili kwa sababu wamekuwa ni tisho la county.
All right, before we talk policy, this concern is not unique to Lamu. That today we will have attacks, but will not be able to classify, the kind of attacks that they are. But equally, there's one thing that is clear. We are able to trace and understand the terror triggers, the insecurity triggers that we have in the country. Why is it then that we're not addressing these root causes before we even think of addressing the main problem?
I want to zoom in on something George said. Byron said it in different terms. So George said that for the longest time, there's been that tactical approach, but not strategic approach. And then he talked about over-reliance on hard power or the kinetic approach from a military point of view, as opposed to soft power. Byron called it winning hearts and minds, which in today's military, parlance is a very important concept. You don't just go to a place to conquer it militarily. You need to win over the hearts and minds of the people. Stella approached it from a human rights perspective. Every single Kenyan is a citizen of this country who is entitled to equal protection under the law, which includes security. It broke my heart to hear one of the elders talking as if he's in a different country. He was referring to Inchi, he was asking, are we in a different country? And sometimes when you go to some of these remote places, you'll even hear them, talk as if they've lost hope of being part of the Kenyan community. I want to zero in on an important aspect, which is a soft power. And the first rule that you look at when you look at soft power is the idea of socio-economics, and then number two, cultural and community. The last two citizens who were interviewed, you had them say, both of them talked about unity, and they encompassed everybody. They said the government, the leadership, the local community, and other people. And then the lady who spoke very passionately about this idea of the community and who knows, the attackers from today, there were over 200. they didn't just come from thin air. They passed through some places and people saw. Because I said context is important, when we were talking about the Israeli situation, we noticed a few things from every single government today studying that situation because it's very serious. Our population today is just over 55 million. Israel's is just over 9 million. So we are about just over 6 times greater than them. If they lost 1,300 people, if you do the math, comes to about 7,800 equivalent for Kenya. One of the biggest and undisputed issues that come up when you're doing a post-mortem of that situation is they became over-reliant on technology, on, drones, on, gear that is electronic surveillance and all that, but less reliant on traditional methods like intelligence, which zooms back to what we were saying, people. Now, when you talk about social economics, you have to ask, under what conditions are the people here living? How amenable are they, to some of these factors? And my sister Stella even mentioned, the borders are porous. There's the issue of both corruption and just what we do that enables some of these factors. But the biggest issue today is, for security to work, you need the cooperation of the citizen who is on the ground. You talked about it when you said we need to listen to the local people. They know the problem. They know the root causes. They know these people. And many of the times, unfortunately, one of us mentioned victims. Today's victim is tomorrow's perpetrator. Because today somebody gets their dad killed, their mom killed, their brothers killed, and then they get all angry. I had a kid today morning, they were hunkering down in school and they were saying, we didn't even go for lunch. We've been hunkering down for hours since 9 a.m. And now all we're hearing is bullets. That kid is not only being traumatized, but is being conditioned to a certain way of thinking. And I had that particular kid, a very young boy, say, talk to the government help us. So it's important for us to remember we need the people in these local communities. George made an important point that from days gone by, when they hear government, they think of hard power. They think of the military coming in with operations. They think of GSU coming in with all kinds of, operational response to these incidents. But the question becomes, when will we get the people in these local areas to become partners and shareholders in security so that when there is information, they can actually pass it on and believe that the government is there to help them. The government is a friendly, face. My brother Byron talked about, the police service as opposed to police force. So how easy is it for somebody to come up and say, hey, something is going wrong there? So even as we do the hard approach, the soft approach is super mission critical.
Quickly,
yes.
What's in a social security system? Beyond the people, because it is also important that we talk, and we've also had them say, we need to come together and all that. But
yes.
Coming together is one thing, but just what is the aspect of the social security system in terms of achieving this?
It's very important because when George said that most of what some of those people, when they hear government, they think of disciplined forces or military or police, right? The chief. It's important for people to look at the social services and the structure of that community. Are people having something to eat? How likely are people to be bribed to keep quiet when things are happening? Are people content with the services that they're getting? And most importantly, how do they view their responsibility? Because the security agencies cannot be everywhere at every time. We look at 6 things. We look at the who, the what, the where, the when, the how, and the why. So we need to have a comprehensive approach that says, we need these communities to speak to us. We need these communities to open up, but we have an obligation to them. By the time somebody is speaking as if they live outside Kenya, there's a gap there. By the time somebody is looking at the government as a hostile sort of force that's coming to their place, there's a problem there. So we need to have a paradigm shift that says, let's take those roads to those people. Let's take that economic development there. Let's take care of the children, the women, the men. What is going on socioeconomically? And security will be a key fruit that will be reaped from that.
At the heart of this, George, the welfare of the security practitioners and the personnel is crucial. Have we looked into that?
Before I answer that, let me just talk a bit about the situation in Lamu.
Quick one, yeah.
I think what you're not looking at is what is happening in Lamu per se. Because if you listen to those people, they know something that the government is not addressing. They are talking about, okay, if it's terrorism, you talk about Garissa or Wajir, it might be. What is this other thing that is causing insecurity in Lamu that is not being addressed? And for a fact, Lamu has been having security challenges for a very long time. And I think we first went to Lamu with the military in 1966.
Correct.
We built a GSU camp in Mukoe in 1972. We've been having these skirmishes there. People have been killed, bandits. Those days we used to call them bandits. And then at some point, it changed. Now it became terrorism. So where is the line between bandits and terrorism? If you look at the recent attacks, they have a different face. Initially, we had the Al-Shabaab coming in, attacking people in Mpeketoni, and then they changed completely. They concentrated their attacks on military installations, military convoys. And then all of a sudden, we are having them back again, now attacking civilian targets. So this is it's dynamic. So we must differentiate if this is a bandit attack or a terrorist attack. And once we get to that, and this is what we need to get from the people, we refer to it as popular intelligence. Those people have popular intelligence. Yes. They know what is happening. And in fact, that one lady said, we know these people. We have herders in that forest. They interact every other day with these bandits in the forest. So who are we dealing with in Lamu? The moment we differentiate that this is a bandit attack and this is a terror attack, we'll be heading to getting a solution. Now, on the issue of welfare, I think that is where the problem is. If you look at our forces, especially the police, you realize that these are people that feel abandoned. You get to talk to 5 policemen, 3 will tell you, if I get an opportunity, I'll get out. Why? Housing, salaries, allowances, health.
Kenya Kwanza government is not getting it right?
It's not getting right. And the other day when Kenya Kwanza came in, they said, we have given police autonomy. They will have their own resources. It's not happening. And that is why at some point we had the Maraga task force. What has it recommended? The only thing that we had is that policemen will not stay in a particular station for more than 3 years. And then they said you're going to have people recruited in the police service as direct entry inspectors. Nothing much. So we've not talked about the welfare of the police officers. You go to places like Lam, you go to these bandit areas, there's no hardship allowance. You get killed there, there is no insurance for you. You get injured, you get abandoned. So at some point, and I'm sorry to say this, I worked there. Our bosses used to tell us, you go out. You are a corporal, I'm giving you 9 officers, don't go and kill my people. So what did you do in such a situation? Get out of camp, sit somewhere, wait, patrol out. At 4, patrol back. You've done nothing. Because at the end of the day, you feel like
survival.
This is survival. Yeah? It's not easy for bandits to plan and cordon off a GSU camp and get away with it.
Right.
Look at the numbers. You are 32, that is 1 platoon. They will come 300, like what happened today. There were more than 200, all armed. As Stella asked, where do they get these weapons?
Report has it that
and the weapons are not just small guns, they are not 303s. They are using military hardware. Where do they get this from? And how is the government addressing this? Knee-jerk reactions, disarmament. 2-3 weeks. Look at the way we dealt with Mount Elgon and the way we are dealing with North Rift.
Right.
2 different styles, 2 different strategies. Mount Elgon, the Support Land Defense Force was hit and it remained hit. But here we are playing cat and mouse games with these people. Why are we doing that?
Quick round, George, before we come to a close.
Yeah, absolutely. And, much has been said regarding the, of course, the situation that we've seen in the country before. Linda, as you talk about that, what are some of the solutions that your panel would be offering?
All right, well, we're bringing it back to this end, and I think the gentleman can respond to that, right?
So the first thing, there's an angle we haven't really discussed, which always comes out at some point, especially in Lamu and some of the surrounding areas. Once the residents start talking, after some time, you'll hear about politics and money politics and geopolitics. So one solution is to look at root causes specifically and ask yourself, who's benefiting when people fight like this? So that's an important question to solving this. The second one is what I suggested, which is a security principle: the who, the what, the when, the where, the how, and the why. Let's answer these questions. Number 3, let every part of Kenya be a sacred place where every citizen is an equal citizen of this country. It should not matter that you are in Turkana, you're in Lamu, you're in the North Rift, you're here in Nairobi. We need to get that part seriously, and Stella delved into it from a human rights perspective. Every Kenyan is important and deserves the protection of both the state and also other leadership entities. The third and most important solution is the socioeconomics. Like my brother Byron said, winning the hearts and minds of the people. They do know. A lot of people from Lamu will tell you this is a local problem. It has a local angle. The local people can help be part of the solution. So we need to become as dynamic as the problem is. Not to say the threat itself is not, because the people on the other side doing these things, they study what is going on. They study the solutions that are being effected. So we need to become as dynamic, but even more importantly, which is my last point, let's become more strategic. Let's become more proactive. Let's think about these things before they happen. Let's not be as reactive. Let's not be people who just go in with hard power and kinetic power, but let's look at the soft power aspects. Let's be more strategic and look into the future so that we can preempt these things before they happen and we can be able to have lasting solutions.
Right. You know, we haven't talked about or spoken about, you know, petty crimes. That you hear someone in Kisii County has been found with around 600 phones. You know, so you begin asking yourself, at what point, by the time they're getting to the 600th phone, they've not been caught? Just where are we in terms of security? But George, to you, on the question of policy, the arena sits law, strategy, declaration, structure, and all this. Why don't we get it right still?
Absolutely, Baron, and you know that's a question that Linda, rather, that's a question we've been trying to find its answers to with Baron Adera. He's still here with me. As we end up, Baron, and even as you listen to the other panelists, what they've been saying, looking at solutions as a person who has been in this field before, insider now outsider, looking in and looking at how we are progressing as a country in this 21st century. What are some of the solutions that you want to see and some of the actions and things moving forward?
Well, no one straight answer to such an interesting question. As George said even at the beginning, there's a whole load of cocktail of challenges. And I think Kenya right about now is a smorgasbord of challenges. Security, economics, all these things are suffering. And on the altar of discussing security, which is really a wide subject, people try to attempt to discuss security from very narrow angles. Sometimes it's reduced to where we're thinking Rungu are the guards and just the police or the army, forgetting the huge part of it, the key stakeholders, the consumers of security, so to speak, and that's where the general populace, John did say we are just about over 55 million Kenyans.
Yes.
So if you have a look at those numbers and of course the measures that we have in place to run the wheels of security, then that already is an interesting subject to have a look at. Unless we are really just a very well-behaved society, that sadly I don't think we are. We are not Kenyans. If you are to just drive out of this studio right about now, you'll start to witness quite some chaos. You just need to get to the roads of Kenya to start to realize how badly we behaved we are. And that points you in the wrong direction in terms of just the sum total of even just security as we are discussing it. So moral rearmament would be part of it. And psychologists call it emotional contagion, just the feelings of a leader or just someone sitting on top of this organization, TV47. The orientation in terms of just what their feelings are will bleed out and permeate the rest or infect you guys. So chances are you'll behave in a culture that is informed by the top leadership of this organization itself. So that is a factor. If you start to hear, and in terms of basically the actors themselves here, the buck stopping with the big boy, and that's the NPS. The other people that we're discussing here can be said to be consumers or victims thereof as other stakeholders. And interestingly, the other day when you had the IG say that in his own office he's had attempts at being bribed by his own people. And of course we talked about the report by Wispy. Yes. And we didn't have any follow-on report that said, oh, those who attempted to actually bribe him, did they succeed, or what was done? You know, the question that us who sat here asking ourselves. So a moral rearmament would be a big thing. And as I said, in terms of the report that was done by WISP in conjunction with IP in 2017, I don't know whether there's others that did come forward. I don't know how much ground has been covered in the right direction as regards that heavy indictment. But that said, I feel we need to look more inwards and have our mindsets lockstep with the fact that we are now a service rather than a force. And then the other bits, and I think the other panelists, without belaboring that point,
just briefly,
did intimate to the fact that we need to bring everybody to the table where the national cake is being split.
Yes.
And the places that have been marginalized, that's a word that's been used over time, can be relooked, and we can have a say that is strongly in that direction. Say, hey, as a country, everybody's got to feel part and parcel of the table where the national cake is being split.
Yes.
And that in itself will cause huge goals in the right direction in terms of addressing the root causes that we talked about that inform these acts of criminalities.
Baringo, there are great points that you bring up, insight as well. Victor, I want to throw it over to you for the home stretch of this conversation.
Absolutely, thank you. Now, before we shifted to the other side, you had a point to make about victims.
Yes.
Please.
After the 2020 Constitution, which is talked clearly about the rights of the suspects, but it was silent on the rights of the victim. So you would find that suspect is arrested and taken to court, and then because they have the right to bail bond, they are released. And then the victim says, "Munashika mtu wetu alafu mnaachilia." Like, I'm not getting justice, not understanding that it is their right. But now there is a Victim Protection Act, which gives them the platform to express their views once they have a case in court. If you feel that this perpetrator is a nuisance to the community and should not be released back, you have the right to express yourself. That was not there initially. So the law protects both the victim and the accused persons.
Right. As a parting shot, what message do you have for anyone watching right now? Those in authority and those that are being governed, the Kawaida Kenyans?
Let's focus on people-centered solutions, especially when it comes to the insecurity. These are problems within the community. If the community can be allowed to be part of the team that brings up the solutions or suggests solutions, then they can come up with a lasting solution, permanent solution to the problem of insecurity and the fighting and the banditry. Yes. And also bring the infrastructure to those communities. The evolution came to bring the national cake closer to the people, but there are people who are not enjoying the national cake for reasons known to the leaders in those areas. So let's embrace devolution.
Right.
And its fruits.
Right. They say security is not a product, but a process.
True.
And good people, I certainly hope that this evening, with the aid of our 4 guests, we've helped to give some insight into what exactly needs to be done as far as process is concerned. Thank you so much, Stella, for your insight. Thank you, gentlemen, for your insight. I know it's a massive conversation. We couldn't have been able to finish all of it in one sitting, but we appreciate you for coming and sharing what you've been able to do so. Thank you so much.
Absolutely, a great conversation that we've had. Your feedback, of course, has been noted. We did see, your questions as well as your comments. I've been speaking to Baringo Adera, a security expert. Thank you so much, sir, for joining us and speaking to us, having served in the Special Forces. And Linda, whom did you have on your panel?
Well, George Musamali, security expert, did not get much time to give his parting shot, but you know what? The conversation continues, right? That's the whole idea, as well as John Kinwithi, who's a security advisor and leadership consultant.
And absolutely, on behalf of the entire crew that has made this a success, we want to wish you a wonderful night. My name is George Maringa.
Mine is Victor Moyakane. Good night and God bless you.
And the lady is Linda Alela. See you next time.
Absolutely. Have a good night.
Good night.